So welcome everybody. Can you hear me at the back? Yep. Okay, thank you. My name's Gordon Noble. I'm a Research Director at the UTS Institute for Sustainable Futures. So I'm going to be chairing this session here today. Our topic here today is reshaping the future of global education. So it's fair to say that's a pretty small topic. And we're going to do in 90 minutes, we're going to really cover essentially considering how we innovate the whole system of global education. I'd like to do an acknowledgement of country first before we begin. So I'd just like to acknowledge we're on here in Australia for our guests here, that we're on the Gadigal lands of the Eora Nation, and you may have heard that in previous presentations. And so I'd like to acknowledge the elders past and present. In the context of this conversation, I'd also just like to acknowledge the importance of really First Nations knowledge, and that's not just here in terms of the Gadigal peoples, but just more broadly. And just a question for us is really how we actually share, and what are the guidance around sharing First Nations knowledge, and how do we do that in a way that's consistent with principles of free, prior and informed consent. So I'd just like to acknowledge that. Now, just for the record for people who might be online, but also for recording, we're going to be fairly intimate in terms of our presentations, but I'm going to introduce you all. Sounds quite strange when we're so small. So we've got three speakers here, so just bear with me for a second. So Angie Bexley is largely, you're going to take control of this session, Angie, and really start to do a lot of the job that so I can sit back and relax. But Angie is a fellow at ANU, experience around managing and evaluation projects with DFAT, and really a key focus around developing strategies for financing development that address the gender climate nexus. And co-author of a book around this area, Gender Equality and Diversity in Indonesia. We welcome Dr. Dorito Setiawan, who's an Education Innovation Policy Advisor at Pelita Harapan University in Indonesia. Previous experience including serving as Deputy to the Presidential Special Envoy for Poverty Alleviation, to acknowledge that, and focusing today on Indonesia's education challenge. And then we're very pleased to have Dr. Stephanie Riyadi, probably from the private sector role, but President of Universitas Pelita Harapan and Executive Director of the Pelita Harapan Group, which runs, I think we said it might be 58 schools now, is that not 56, and a university as well. So the conversations, just to frame it, that we're talking about, we're going to be talking about really this conversation of partnership and collaboration. And from my perspective, and I'll come and sit down in a second and be part of the conversation, but SDG 17 is often the one that we sort of forget. And in my mind, it's the most important because it is the Sustainable Development Goal around partnership. So that's the context. The context we are in at the moment is a world in which international aid is being disrupted. I think we all know that. I'm sure that you've been in sessions that have talked about that in the last couple of days. What does that mean? How do we open up new conversations around innovation? What is the role of partnerships and collaboration? Particularly, how do they then link into curriculum, teacher training, and equitable access? These are the core questions. What sort of new models can we develop around PPPs, we call private-public partnerships? That can involve also an area that is my area of focus, which is around finance. What's the role of sustainable finance, for instance, to support this? And once we've all done this, how do we leverage this, right? So how do we actually learn from what we're doing, but then there's a lot that comes out of these experiences that can be applied elsewhere. So that's what we're doing today, but I'm going to hand over to Angie and I'll come and join the table and participate as one of the group. But over to you, Angie. And I've got this little slide.
Thank you. I don't know where to go. I might just go over here just while because the people online also, and then we'll sort of open it up.
And we will need to use the microphone.
Okay, so we should go up there then.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So hopefully those online can hear me. So welcome everyone. And thank you, Gordon, for the introduction. Today, we're here, to talk about no small feat, how we are going to reshape the future of education, particularly in the face of global challenges that we have. And I'm going to centre this also on climate change. We're here also bringing a panel. It's really exciting to be here in Sydney, and the conversations I've had over the last couple of days around rigour, around impact, around regeneration, return value to those that are affected or impacted by our development programs. I was really taken with, I think it was Kate Bennett's talk yesterday about regeneration design, regeneration finance, how we create long-term value together and place the importance around place-based, around local contexts, and our capacity to evolve. So our panel is bringing together a range of perspectives, and I think it's really important, and I'm really excited to be here with my Indonesian colleagues to bring a missing perspective, I feel, often in our development debates around those perspectives of local actors, but also, who are those local actors in this ecosystem from the private sector, from philanthropy. And we're going to take a deep dive into Indonesia as a very compelling case and showcase some of the collaborative and innovative work that we're trying to do in Indonesia, how we bridge not only education financing gaps, but the innovation that's required to build this and advance a STEM or STEAM agenda. So we hope through our collective insights to provide an overview of some strategies required for a transformational process in how we can turn plans into action. So I hope we can break this down into our little table. But first, I'd like to really talk about what Gordon said, to position this as a discussion around SDG 17, around partnerships, but also focusing on SDG 4, quality education, amid a rapidly escalating climate crisis. So at the heart of this discussion is STEAM education, so science, technology, engineering, arts and maths, that really fosters interdisciplinary thinking and action. This is our crucial tool in our fight against climate change. But progress, as we know, is hampered by inequalities, declining development aid, declining national funding budgets that we see in Indonesia, and education systems, and I won't go into this so much, but this is something that I'm very interested in, education systems that have been built, after World War II, that are focused around sturdiness rather than resilience or adaptation. As educators, researchers, philanthropists, policymakers, we know that education is not just the cornerstone of our economic futures, but how do we make these futures sustainable? And it is clear that we need to apply a critical lens also in how we're going to go about this. We know that there are problems, challenges and gaps, and we've learnt over many, many decades of what has been working and clearly what isn't working anymore. We need to find a new way. We need to establish and prioritise transformative partnerships. So I guess today is really about sparking a discussion, inviting others, non-usual suspects into our conversations around what sort of models we need, not just about funding, but how we shift and refocus the purpose and partnership mechanisms for a global education system that promotes resilience, but also puts the local actors in the driver's seat. And to get a better understanding, I think, of what the challenges are, because we don't often hear from their perspective. So I've got some little slideys. So we can, we all know, and we cannot back away from the figures and the impacts. The international education aid has fell, before this most recent crisis, 21% over a 10, 11-year period. the withdrawal of US aid has been devastating. This leaves us with a global funding gap of 4 trillion annually. This decline comes at a time when interdisciplinary knowledge demands are skyrocketing. The climate crisis impacts are increasingly evident. In Indonesia, we have children in Kalimantan trying to go to school. There's constant fires. There's floods in Jakarta. It is real. It is not a future. It is happening right now. And we know, that IPCC, so many, continually the reports are coming out about how climate change disproportionately affects vulnerable populations. This is further exacerbating educational inequalities. We have whole communities that are being displaced, and loss and damage claims have already begun. The system itself is not producing the skill sets required that we need to face these challenges. So this reality is really about demanding a fundamental shift, not only how we finance education, but that system of education and what it is doing in terms of relevance, quality and equity. We need to move beyond fragmented approaches which have not delivered the solutions that we need. We need to apply a different sort of thinking. So before we get to Spain, I've thought about how we can develop a sort of a conceptual framework about interconnected approaches that require both interdisciplinary and collaborative mindsets and mechanisms to realise the goal. So transformative partnerships for sustainable outcomes, the traditional corporate social responsibility approaches are simply not enough anymore. We need partnerships that are grounded in collaborative governance, co-creation of solutions, equitable benefit sharing, not just the risk mitigation that sometimes governments are more interested in by bringing in partners. We're sharing the risk. So when this happens, what happens? When you put metrics like stakeholder participation, downward accountability, co-ownership, governance systems, linkages, and that regenerative potential at the core of systems that are then monitoring this work, what happens then? Can we envision new sorts of partnerships between private sector and government and ensure that transparent decision-making and built-in robust accountability mechanisms are in there? We know projects like the Global Partnership Education, that are drawing in funds. In essence, it's trying to bring together these different stakeholders, but GPE is still struggling with issues around equitable input and equitable governance. So, thinking about the sorts of monitoring and evaluation, how we design these projects and what we're looking to in terms of success. What does success look like for all of these actors? Decolonising STEAM agendas. So that's as simple as integrating and embedding local knowledge systems within curricula. We have situations, what happens when you integrate local contexts. So for instance, the fires in Kalimantan, the constant floods in Jakarta, what happens when you integrate this knowledge around what people are actually experiencing in these communities into a STEAM curricula and making it culturally relevant. There's some fantastic examples in New Zealand around bringing in Maori knowledge and sitting it alongside and how it can be integrated into science education, for example. There are some fantastic STEAM examples around the world, and I think looking at local context and not getting too caught up in what it could mean, but just looking locally and incorporating those in a shared learning agenda. And finally, the work that I have been working on over 20 years around child-centred approaches to STEAM education. So children's voices are often those in educational policy making that are most marginalised. And we talked a lot about yesterday about participatory approaches, and the intent can often be there, but it's often let down. We talk a lot about children, but rarely with children. And so we're looking to do an assessment at the moment that is participatory based, building from the ground up, from what children themselves have experienced through STEAM initiatives, and what they value, and how can we take that back in and build up a system that is genuinely based on participatory methods. You know, youth advisory councils, child-led research, there are mechanisms in there, but it's what we do then with that information and how we build a truly genuinely participatory approach. Also, you know, these are approaches to be able to shift education systems from this sort of sturdiness of, you know, being that constant in worlds in flux, to be able to shift to resilience. What is the skill set needed to be able to face these challenges? We need to shift this, and it is happening in parts of the world, but as a system, it's not quite there. So that's some of the latest thinking, but of course we have to be realistic. Even with these proposed solutions, the reality is that SDG 4 remains off track. The numbers, as we showed before, speak for themselves. So at the highest level, and hopefully we can go into this a little bit further, just last week, the recent discussions at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development was the first intergovernmentally agreed financing for development framework since 2015. It made all the noises of we need to align, we need to expand, we need to diversify education funding. It put forward solutions, blended finance, outcome-based financing, which Indonesia does not have at the moment, talking about social bonds, impact investments. So how to strengthen and diversify education funding, I think, is a very, very important conversation. And one that we are engaged in and have an actual concrete model of. But what is important, I think, in all of these discussions is we don't fall into the same thinking that more blended finance is going to fix the system. We really need to focus the conversation and step back on what partnerships look like, what is joint purpose, and really keep at the centre children's rights alongside these issues of equity and sustainability, to be able to build a system that can be resilient in the face of all these global changes. Particularly important is to make sure that the data about whatever it is that we're doing is being collected and shows that this is working and is able to be responded to or adapted to when we can see that things are off chart. So I think, you know, I think we're all going to agree here that collective action is what we need. It's not the responsibility of government. It's not the sole responsibility of private sector. We need to prioritise STEAM agendas and frameworks that cultivate genuine multi-stakeholder partnerships to address not just the funding gap, but also the purpose gap of where our education systems are focusing and the sorts of skill sets that we need to build to be able to deal with these crises that we have. So that looks a bit funny. I think just to end, you know, there's roles for all of us in this work. So focus on financing for policymakers, building those new frameworks to address those skill sets, to meet the challenges, not only climate change, but all of those issues. How does government centre itself, and what help does it need to be able to involve and really embody those genuine partnership principles? What help do we need to give government to be able to do that? For investors, for philanthropists, you know, to keep innovating, you know, that's your role. That's where, you know, you can go so much quicker than government, can go so much quicker than what these aid development programs can do, to be able to then bring that innovation to a national, you know, to be able to scale at that level. And then, of course, for research and educators to ensure that, you know, M&E systems are being built with the metrics that matter, metrics such as downward accountability, ownership, governance, and the regenerative potential and impact, and what does return value and impact actually look like, to be able to incorporate all of those, you know, traditional financial ideas around what impact is, but also to shift that. What is social impact? What does it mean at that national scale? So I think I'll just leave it there and return to our table, and we can maybe open up the conversation, and we have to stay on the microphone.
Just finish ours.
Yeah, okay.
Do you want to come? Yep, Silakan. So if I go, oh, I think it comes up. Yeah.
We're very intimate and very cute and then all that, but like it's still very lovely to be here. Thank you, Gordon. Thank you, Angie, Stephanie, Christine, and I haven't really caught your name, but two lovely guests they're here. So I think I'm going to speak from the side of the practitioner, really, who do things on the ground, who connecting dots between different players. Gordon mentioned, like I completely forgot that I was part of the previous administration in Jokowi era. I was the deputy of special envoy, especially on SDG 1 and SDG 2. And like I'll share a bit about that because it's gonna give a bit of context why I'm interested in whatever I'm doing right now. First of all, the reason why the special unit was established was when Jokowi realized that the existing units, the coordinating units under him, was not sufficient enough to achieve the goal, especially for SDG number 1, SDG number 2, no poverty and no hunger. We're talking about how different everyone, when it comes to what's considered as success, what's considered as the goals, and everybody's talking about different language within different sector, and it's very siloed. So right after I finished my assignment, I met with Stephanie actually, and we're talking about like how to do things differently in terms of achieving SDG goals, and then how Pelita Harapan has been in the education sector for like more than 30 years and maybe longer than that. And I shared with Stephanie in the beginning that like you have so many potentials, and then this is the perfect timing. The reason, like Angie mentioned about like how it's relatively quicker if we want to do some development work or partnership from the private sector, because again, from the government, coming from my contact is that I was only given an hour, not an hour, it felt like an hour, a year and a half to achieve the SDG 1 and SDG 2. And then I was given like I don't think the money was an issue because we're coordinating unit. We have the access starting from Bapenas, the planning planning unit within the presidential. We have all the access from the foreign minister. Like I can talk to all the levels, but at the same times, they see me as the magicians. Like you can do, like okay, you're assigned to do something specific, so you might be able to do it. But at the same time, it's only a year and two. So I was at the peak of doing something big, and then, okay, the president changed, and the current administration has a totally different approach. Well, I'm being too candid here, but that's pretty much the reason why I'm so happy to be part of the Pelita Harapan group in doing this team. The reason, I think there's a promise in public-private partnership because the opportunity like I have to add that it's not only to finance gaps, but it's also we have to make sure that we have the same purpose, because there's definitely gap. Because again, when it comes to innovation, digital tools and industrial alignment, government may have like all the definition in the world. All the ministry have different definitions when it comes to the terms that they're working on. But when it comes to talking to each other, they're not doing it, even within the ministry. That's when I think the promise of PPP, especially in education, comes to play. And then there's a share risk, improved responsiveness, and scale best practices. I think that's where the private sector can come to play. And then we're going to talk about marker space and industrial linked curricula in private schools. As Angie shared, that we're currently collecting data to make sure that like we have a solid basic some package that we can offer to the government, and it's going to be something that we can be tangible things to do. As you know, Indonesian education landscape, there's like an issue between centralized curriculum and decentralized implementation. This is something that I always find on the ground, that the government keep changing the curriculum at the same time, and we're talking about like teachers who have to keep up with the changing at all the time, because on the implementation level, the gap is really huge. So that's really the landscape. And then uneven infrastructure and resource distribution, and it's definitely connected with how hard it is to implement and development if it stays in the current state. So we have to think development or partnership differently. And growing appetite for reform under Prabowo multi-leadership. As much as they really want to do it, they don't really have the framework. They don't really have the innovation at hand. So that's, again, is the portion of private sector to come in. The key challenge in PPP, like we talked briefly about fragmented governance, equity risk, regulatory gap, and transparency issues. I think at the end of it, it's really about trust. How the government and then the private sector seem to know each other, but they don't know each other, as Gordon mentioned. They don't know each other. They don't know how things work. The culture is totally different from one another, but yet at the same time, they want to share some programs that everyone thinks is going to be equally distributed, that there's actual leverage, but that's actually not the case. And then, like we started our STEAM project because the reason why we do so, because we believe that that's something the private sector is really good at doing, but at the same time, that's the priority of the current administration. But at the same time, we talk about cultural and political barriers. There's a big public mistrust of private motives, because when we talk about why would you come into this space? Because there's got to be something, but it's hard to navigate the mistrust within like a day or two, and it's ongoing, and the time is not always on our side. So there's an ongoing public mistrust of private motives. And private actors struggle with bureaucratic hurdles. And this is something that we have to handle, because like there's one thing that the higher level wants something to work, but at the same time, bureaucracy still there. And then we have totally different culture to approach how things work, how partnership work. So this remains the barriers. And again, I mentioned in the beginning, short-term political transition disrupt continuity. This is the reason why private sector is very good. It's a significant players, because no matter how like the administration goes, like the political dynamic can be anywhere, changing and all that. But the private sector will remain there, and then I think it's more sustainable if the private sector comes in and then do some development work. So what does success require? I think this is something that we can talk about later, but like I think the policy recommendation is establish a national PPP framework for education, especially because when it comes to public-private partnership, the government doesn't have a specific framework to work with the private sector. They would have, as the current state, they would impose their term and condition to us, but at the same time, like we have to contribute in a significant amount of our resources to do this. So they don't have any framework. So it's like every actor will experience different experience, different state of dynamic, depending on how the negotiation goes. And I think it's not standardized, and it's very discouraging for the private sector to be part of this. So I encourage the government to establish a national PPP framework education. Incentivize partnership in under-resourced regions. This is something that the government always keep, like we want to work with the remote area, but at the same time, they don't have the framework. So that's where they have to have, again, the framework and the sort of like a template to do work in the under-resourced regions. Embed evaluation mechanism from day one. I think this is very important because as much as like many of the partnership or PPP goes, like what I understand, they're not clear about how they're going to establish MNE in the partnership. And scale innovation, this is what the private sector would be able to offer, but at the same time, to scale up is really not the private sector really area. It's more of the government, how to scale up the innovation that the private sector is already able to offer. And number 5 is build public sector negotiation and M&E capacity. So it has to be shared work that the government and the private sectors are doing, and this has not been done. So, thank you. So.
All right. Thank you, Angie, and also Dorita for some of your sharing. I want to finish off our session with an additional section to our discussion before we start our discussions today. But before I do that, I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Stephanie, and I come from Indonesia. I particularly oversee an educational organization called the Pelita Harapan Foundation, which I'll share a little bit later. To be very honest, this is my first development conference ever, because I come from a very different world. In fact, I don't interact with very many development people in general. So Angie might be my first real exposure. So thank you, Angie, for giving me such a great impression. But it is a clear learning journey for myself. Next slide, please. So I oversee an educational organization. Oh, it has to be the clicker. Yeah. Right, all right. That oversees 58 schools, and our schools are located all over Indonesia, from the big cities into the third-tier cities. So we have schools in Jakarta, many international schools, some of the best international schools there, but also even more schools that are located in the remote areas of Papua. So we're very diverse and very used to operating in very different contexts and societies within Indonesia itself. Now, as a private sector organization, we operate with a for-profit mentality, but with a non-profit context, in the sense that we would say that we would be equivalent to any benchmarks of any greatest educational institution around the world. We're one of the largest in Indonesia as well. But we also support a lot of schools in remote area that go beyond just schooling, but into community development and healthcare development. We are also part of a larger group called the Lipo Group, in which we have the largest private healthcare chain of hospitals, 41 hospitals and 60 schools. We also operate in property, and we have a number of malls and banks and other things. So this is part of that larger ecosystem, and our commitment as a group has always been to transform lives. And so really, at the end of last year, we thought that it's time for us to really consolidate some of the initiatives that we're already doing and that we aspire to do and do it together. And for that reason, we created an umbrella called the Riyadi Foundation, in which Dorita is also part of that. And one of the key initiatives that we have under the Riyadi Foundation is the a STEM initiative. So STEM Indonesia Cerdas is really the recognition that science, technology, engineering, and mathematics are crucial for a country in order for it to advance forward to become a developed nation. We also talk about STEM in the context of Indonesia's aspirations. Indonesia has an aspiration to become a knowledge-based economy by 2045, to really also exceed that threshold to become a developed country. Indonesia is also one, however, that has a very low human capital index as per World Bank's 2018 studies. And so if a person has a potential output of 100 units throughout their lifetime, Singapore, the average Singaporean would be around 88 units, whereas the average Indonesian would be around 54 units. And the reason why Indonesia has such a low human capital index as many, but one of it is because of stunting, because we have a prevalence of above 20% stunting. But the second one is also the adjusted years of schooling, because the majority of Indonesians actually have 12 years of schooling already. However, when adjusted with quality, that number drops to a little over 7 years of schooling. So that really tells us the quality of education that is in Indonesia, and that STEM is one of the areas that are critically lacking here. So here's a little bit of data that we have a low enrollment in science programs because only 14% of secondary students compared to are interested in, or pursue science in comparison to the OECD average of 22%. So going back, STEM is really important as a key driver of innovation, economic growth, and global competitiveness. At the same time, because there is a lack of science base and interest in science, we also see a critical skills gap when the students graduate. I can say for sure from the private sector, this is always an ongoing issue. It's very hard to find qualified engineers and much less so science researchers and all that. And so this is a critical skills gap. And this affects the national priorities and also how competitive Indonesia can be in the future. And this is also another indication of the low science, mathematics, and reading performance of Indonesia. Of course, PISA is not the only measure, but certainly our numbers have not improved enough. They've not been able to catch up with developing countries. In fact, in the last 5 years, our numbers have dropped so much that we're actually back below or very close to our 2005 numbers, depending on which metrics we're looking for. So this is the reality of science education in Indonesia, and there's a lot that we can do. And so, coming from the private sector, we're not the government, and our goal is not to solve every issue under the sun. But at the same time, we're here to contribute in any meaningful way we can, and that's really our heart. And so one of the ways that we've tried to partner with the government and also the civil society is through this maker space movement. And so, we've seen this success story across our group because, first of all, our international schools have successfully launched something called the Science Academy, whereby students were paired with researchers and were able to do cutting-edge research and also really showcase their project-based learning. It was such a formative process over a number of months. And many of those studies ended up going into Scopus Index publications. And so that was something that became a signature program of our international schools. Now, obviously, we only have 6 international schools across our 58 schools. So the next question we asked several years ago was, how do we take that to our national schools, especially the ones that are located in the remote areas? And so what we were aiming to do was to create science modules and also kits and packages where we would help teachers, because we also produce teachers in our university, and we know that primary teachers are not taught to teach science per se. It might be part of the role, but they're trained as primary teachers. And so what we want to do is not put more burden on them or expect the thousands of primary school teachers to be able to teach science, but to support them with the right materials, the right tools, and make it as easy and straightforward as possible that even the least qualified primary teacher would still be able to teach science at a reasonable degree. And so we took that learning, and this is an ongoing project that we have, but we have begun experimenting how to deploy this across our schools. So therefore, we wanted to take this also into the public-private partnership with the government. And so through STEM Indonesia, we have a partnership between a multi-stakeholder synergy between the Riyadi Foundation and also 5 various ministries that have an interest: the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education, the Ministry of Higher Education and Science Technology, the Ministry of Culture, and the Ministry of Religious Affairs, and Ministry of Communication and Digital. Particularly the Ministry of Primary and Secondary Education and also the Ministry of Religious Affairs are important because they hold the access to the schools, and they're the ones that are able to get buy-in for the schools to form that partnership. Again, we want to contribute as much as we can. We don't want to force our curriculum into the government schools, but insofar as they're useful, as we've seen them in our schools, we would like to share them. And I think, as Angie mentioned, we would think that as private sector, we would be a bit more agile in developing curriculum and developing modules and finding the best of the best resources, because it's in our best interest to do that. When as private sector, we don't do that, the consequence would be that students actually leave, and that would affect our sustainability. And so, we do that already, but our hope is that we can scale this with the stakeholders that partner with us. And so in short, we think going back to the points that Angie and Dorita mentioned, the PPP solution is to bridge gaps and to drive innovation by leveraging private sector expertise and also addressing financial gaps, because the private sector also is part of a larger network that can chip in and help to accelerate some of these initiatives, and also to promote efficiency and sustainability in the future, because we want our programs to have long-lasting impact, and we want the programs to be a continuous improvement and continuously developed to bring positive impact into for children in Indonesia. In closing, I think multi-stakeholder ecosystem or partnerships are really important, and so I look forward to hearing a little bit more about how your perceptions on it and how we can perhaps improve some of our programs based on the input in the people in this room. Yeah. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can have a discussion. We still need to use the mics for the...
You want to join us?
We're a very intimate group. So I've got some people online actually, so they can't see us now, I don't think. Yeah, we would like to invite, but we'll just hand the microphone around. I think they want to be able to see us too. I don't know where the camera actually is. Okay. All right. Right. Okay. Yeah. Good idea. All right. Well, maybe Gordon, I would also like to invite into, really interesting experiences as well in this area around financing and the challenges that we face and the realities that we have. Aid is decimated. It's a reality, and so PPPs, public-private partnerships, are our new reality. And I think for the development sector, this is something very new as well, in how to navigate and bringing together our joint objectives. So I think maybe I'll start and Gordon, I'd like you to chip in as well around how to navigate being able to produce a joint goal. What do you see as the steps to be able to do that? In being able to bring together, you have different objectives, you have different pathways, but in being able to really produce a joint goal, how would you go about that? What would be the sort of steps, challenges to be able to do that? Is that too hard to start with? Easy. You want to go from the government perspective?
Oh, from the government perspective. I think when we were talking about like how we fill the gap of the purpose between the purpose of three different actors, they really have to be clear about their expectation on the get-go. Like it's hard to see like whatever documents out there and they're like, okay, and then refer, may it be international or national, but like it takes some time for all the involving actors to really sit together and see what are the outcomes, what does a partnership look like for each and all the actors involved. So that's has to be very clear in the beginning. Because otherwise, like we think we're doing something similar, but at the same time, like over time, we know it's not working, especially with the one that we just started. Like the government is still finding their own way of maybe consolidating within their own ministry, but at the same time, we don't have time to just delay like the work that we're doing. And then we just jump in, and then let's jump into like making things work. But the government is still not ready to have that innovation to go before they sit with us together, like on the same level, and make sure that we have the same expectation. I think that's from my side.
So going slowly.
Yeah.
Gordon? Yeah.
I was planning on just being the quiet chair, but no. So my experience is obviously a little bit like Stephanie, is private sector, but in and around the financial system. So I've done a lot of work on infrastructure and infrastructure financing. So one of the observations is the first time that there's a PPP for infrastructure, it's this issue that Dorita's talked about trust, that a policymaker, until something has actually happened, it's all conceptual, right? But once there's actually a project that is actually rolled out, then what happens is you can see that the toll road, for instance, is being built, it's been run, it works, right? And that builds trust. Then in the infrastructure, you start to have what you call sort of sediment in the system, which basically makes transactions really difficult to do at scale, right? Because lawyers get involved, and every contract is different and it's complicated. And then the conversation goes to, can you have a simple harmonised contract, right? So that you take some of the costs out of that. And I think one of the other things to get this at scale is to have some sort of initiative that brings all the stakeholders together to share. But I'd probably start with some sort of pilot. Like you need one project, like you had with infrastructure with toll roads, which then went into all sorts of things from bridges to everything else. But you need a single project but no point just doing it for that group. You need to tell a story, right? So that you're leveraging that straight away. So there's a whole lot of things come together, but the framework sort of is, harmonised contract, some sort of initiative, and then telling the story really gets to storytelling.
Yeah, I think my experiences are limited, but I think it is about finding that the commonality. I think from the private sector, especially, we look at the government, we see what their priorities are and where the gaps are. I think with the current administration, we know that there's also a lot of budget cuts, and yet the minister has such a forward-looking, ambitious goals, and so seeing where we can plug in our way is how we go about it.
In terms of getting that joint objective and getting and having that realization that there are different roles we're going to play, but we can understand this is the issue. How we might implement it is going to be different, and so I'm thinking about potentials for working across, as you say, Gordon, bringing in different actors. So bringing in international development actors, for example, who go at a much slower pace, and the sorts of things that would be important. All of the things that were being discussed this morning around having those local perspectives, and bringing in and co-developing the ideas around it. And it gets complex, right? Because bilateral, you know, Australia, Indonesia also has its own interests. So it gets more and more complicated with each actor you bring in. And so is there a tendency for private sector, and Gordon, maybe you'll be able to speak to this, to, you know, to go in with a lot of hope and optimism that, you know, this can work, we can see that gap, it's clear. But then also it gets too difficult because of the variety of actors and the variety of objectives and, you know, different understandings of the problem, and they retreat. Is that a sort of pattern that you see? And then what needs really to change in that? Maybe back to you, Gordon, and then we can talk about the sorts of anxieties, I suppose, that actors have.
Yeah, and so my experience, again, coming to, say, looking at infrastructure. So, and this is, again, when you're talking about a PPP structure, you start to talk about a contract, a transaction, right? That's what it is, you know, effectively. The problem with in infrastructure is that infrastructure adapts. There's not a piece of infrastructure in the world that, you know, if you think about 200 years ago, how infrastructure has changed. Even things like airports, we think about them as, you know, as pieces of infrastructure, how much they've changed over the last 20, 30 years. You know, new technologies, new airlines, they're now shopping centres, they're now hotels. If you have a really narrow way of approaching it, and you don't allow your private sector to adapt, that's a problem. So you need to, again, create, when you've got all those stakeholders, you know, Angie, you're describing, how do you then create that ability to adapt over change, particularly with all this technology that we're seeing coming out from, you know, AI, etc. So I think that's when, you know, you don't want to create a PPP framework that actually prevents innovation. It locks it. You actually want to, yeah. And one of the things that, for instance, it was done in Australia when airports were privatised, which was a very big political decision at the time, was to require every airport to produce a master plan. And it basically required the airports to constantly adapt, right? And that was legislation here in Australia. So there could be ways that you do that, right? It doesn't have to be, you know, just a single contract. It could be legislation, it could be regulation, or even an agreement.
Yeah, building out a framework of looking at all the different areas. So, I mean, in our circumstance, it's, you know, it's looking at policy, it's looking at bringing in innovation and the partnerships to be able to do that. Yeah. Maybe from the audience, and I don't know online if we have any questions or how to access that, but from anybody else's experience, we have a very small group here for those online, so we invite, yeah, anything? Yeah, you just have to speak into the microphone, sorry, so they can hear us. Yeah.
Hello. I honestly don't know how I will go about it, but yeah, my name is Nini and I'm studying Master in Behavioral Economics here at UTS. I also have a couple of friends here who is also like studying in STEM, so as I. And when I saw the data earlier that you, Steph, presented, it's very concerning, honestly. And coming from like personal experience, I've had my entire education's overseas, because I know that even though like I'm passionate about STEM, there's really not like much opportunities in the country. And so my questions is probably, there are two layers to my questions. The first is on the micro base, would you be able to share like what are the frustrations around it? I can only imagine, like, I don't know, like if a private entity wanting to go on a certain direction, but the entire system is like going to the other directions. You could probably share around that. And the other one is on a macro scale. When I saw your program earlier about like how you want to encourage STEM education for primary school teachers, are there any other things that you do in incentivizing the, I don't know, the job of I don't know, like people with the skills of STEM, like, yeah, to kind of like like slowly change the system and incentivize people to learn more about STEM. And yeah, because I, like from economic perspective, I figured that's also going to create like butterfly effect. So then more people in the future would like more intrigued to study STEM. Yeah, I hope that's clear enough.
Yeah, I'll take this. I think I'll answer your second question because it's fresh in my head. And I like how you approached it from an economics perspective. So, you know, there are a lot of barriers that are not only government-related barriers. Like I'll share an example of our Faculty of Artificial Intelligence at the university. And so, you know, what we did was we know that AI is a huge job market in the future. And not only that, the scarcity makes it a better paying job as compared to other science and technology jobs. And so what we wanted to do was to link job opportunity with students as a way to give people social mobility. So what we said was, okay, we'll open 120 slots. The slots can be all full scholarship, and after they graduate, then they can get a guaranteed job in artificial intelligence. So from a rational perspective, it's really low risk, right? If you're a high school student, there's an opportunity, you would think that people would be lining up to get in for a free education, for a guaranteed job with a reasonably guaranteed like payment level. But in reality, there were fewer signups that we had realized. And even when we tried to go with we gathered 60 government schools and we socialized, there were maybe like 30 people who were interested. 3 people ended up signing up, 2 people ended up joining the exam, and none of them made it in. So it's kind of also, there's also a cultural thing from my perspective. I haven't done any studies on this, but I think it's more than just the government being stubborn or people not knowing there's a job opportunity. But I think that inner drive and also the drive to take a risk, right? Because it is still a risk, it's unknown, but someone to want to do it, try it, and make make it work is less there, as opposed to many other countries. I spent 2 weeks in Beijing last week. I mean, the hustle of the people in China is very different than the way they hustle in Indonesia. And I would assume the hustle of the people in India, because I was there last year as well, seems to be very different than Indonesia. And so I think culture is also one thing, not only culture, but also the encouragement for students to take a risk and dream big and really have that grit to like make it happen. As opposed to, being maybe more complacent or I don't know what it is. Yeah, maybe Dorita can share more about it. So that would be my answer to the first one. I suppose with teachers, I also think the issue is not, how do we incentivize them to want to teach STEM, but, it's more like how do we build their capacity so that they can actually teach them. So I don't think it's like when you pay, then you get more teachers. I don't think it works quite that directly. But I think it's more rather with a large education system that we have, how do we upskill everyone? Because again, primary teachers, what do they teach? Bahasa, math, science, everything. You expect them to teach everything under the sun. Maybe sometimes music, sometimes PE. And so it really is about empowering them to be good science teachers with some support.
Did you want to add?
No, you go first, Dorita.
Okay. So I think that's a very excellent point of view, the experience that we can share. From the program perspective, when we're talking about, Stephanie was sharing about the students' intrinsic drive to apply for, or just to go on the process of making it to the Faculty of AI. In my case, we were so excited, on the 28th of May, I still remember that day that we launched our program, and then we gathered the 60 school, and then we shared with them. We invited only 2 best students in the school, 2 STEM teacher, and 1 principal of each school. So there are 60 school who attended, and we shared with them that we're willing to support their STEM labs, and then with the maximum of 100 million rupiah. And we thought that that's going to be they're going to be fast moving. And then the question were, are there going to be a selection criteria? No, just let us know what you need, and then we're going to provide, as long as it's STEM related. And it's July now, and there are only for proposals. And then it's not that we don't follow up, we follow up on the every other, but not every other week. It's like every 3 days, we would like, okay, can we do something? Here's the template, what would be the hassle? And there's always excuses, and then, do you want this or no? Because we thought like, this is like, my goodness, you just have to attend the launch and then tell us what you need. And the reason would be, like, I think one is there's a confidence issue that they feel like, well, we don't know where to start. We just have nothing. And then even saying that, I think that's a great start. Like, boo, we don't have anything. Just give us what you think is the best STEM lab. Even if someone said that, that would be like a great start for me. But no one said anything. They were just like, oh, we're doing this. And then, well, like, you don't always have this offer unless you say it yourself. Like, that's like the perfect picture of how we really want to have like a meaningful participation, like a meaningful contribution to different schools. But at the same time, maybe it's culture too. It's culture too. I'm hoping by August, everyone submitted their proposal and we're ready to like follow up on that. But so far, everyone contacted because we contacted them. Okay, is there anything else? No one does it. So I don't know. I don't know if it's a culture, if it's there's something about STEM definition that people don't really understand, because STEM is not really about like subject based. It's about like the approach. And everyone, like one thing that I'm really proud of when we showcase one of the schools under Pelita Harapan group, that they're talking about the temple renovation, and that's coming from the history subject, but at the same time they're using their STEM approach and how a chandi or a temple come to realization. So that's something that I think it's not complicated, but there's also a value of you're taking a risk, whether or not you want to take this, or whether or not you really want to make sure that this is a student-centered thing. So I think that's from me. So when the question comes to, is there any available STEM jobs available in Indonesia? There are plenty, but like to start it, it's really tricky. Yeah, building a system is really tricky.
I'm going to just come back to behavioural economics because my background is economics as well. So we're basically talking about markets and market structures, and education is a market. UTS, our university, for instance, there's a whole lot of participants in a market beyond the fact that we just run a degree, etc. There are people who, how do you end up at UTS? It's because there's a ranking of universities globally. People look at those rankings, start to then dig in. There's a piece of research, so sorry to get into teacher mode, but which looked at the transformation from the age of sail to the age of basically steam with ships, the shipping industry, right? And what it did is it looked at all the different components and how that actually transformed. It wasn't just here one day there was a sailing ship and here tomorrow there was suddenly a steamship. It was how, for instance, steamships started in lakes and they were piloted. They just didn't go across the Atlantic first up. And then all the service providers that then supported that. There started to be, for instance, providers that would have shipping timetables. Never needed them before because we didn't know when ships were going to arrive. And that's this issue of markets and market ecosystems and the behavioural side. So if you're talking about STEM and you're talking about education as a market, you start to then think from an economics perspective, what are the other things that then start to support that market? What do you need to then provide that integrity that people make those decisions? Indonesia, strangely enough, in stock markets, it was the first stock exchange in the world. This is the history, how this is the colonial era period, and there's obviously a lot of issues with that, but basically how markets, the stock exchange evolved in the first place was because of the need, the transport of ships from say Jakarta through to Europe and the UK and London you needed actually these mechanisms to be able to transfer your shares, if you like, of a ship. And that became a stock exchange. And that really came from Indonesia. So you're on the right track of markets and economics. There's a role here that then links this, and it links it in a sustainable way.
Yeah, hi everyone. My name is Z, and I am studying Master of Digital Health and Data Science at the University of Sydney. And I am really intrigued with the issue of like cultural barriers, in which we try so much to help people to not only understand technology, but use technology to improve a lot of programs, including like health programs itself. One of the experience that I had is that we've tried to develop health applications that help health workers as well as the cadres in Posyandu to record health data. And at first they say to us that the mobile application is helpful and etc. But when we look at the perspective of whether it is being used in long term or not, it becomes like a different conversations, because even if they understood the benefit of using those technology, they don't want to use it unless there's like a direct directions to make it mandatory. So what I understood is that even if we try so much to facilitate them to understood the benefit of technology, they won't move in that directions unless they're being told to report on the outcome, whether they need to be told to report on whether they use the technology or not. So what I see is that this kind of hesitations to move towards using technologies, not only in the education sectors itself, but also in the health sectors. And it's really frustrating to see, because personally, I go as far as studying in Australia to learn about how they make digital technology become available for all. But whenever I try to create like a reflective report on how this compared to Indonesia, there's always these barriers that make it like really hard to implement those kind of approach in Indonesia. So what are your thoughts on, I don't know, like, is there any lesson learned from maybe another country or another program that really has successfully be implemented, I would say, in terms of like pushing people towards using technology itself? So maybe that's my overall question.
Yeah, great question. I think so I worked on the Connexi program, and I wrote the concept for I think it was an $8 million, $6 million grant round for digital transformation. And it was so interesting putting that concept together. And the last time I checked, the government itself had I think it was over 7,000 apps to require, as a citizen, so to get through every part of your day, whether it be health or e-commerce. So, I mean, and then there was a review, and they're, trying to scale that back. But so we're talking about, the appetite and the uptake of technology. I think there's also a sort of a fatigue as well in Indonesian society, whether you're a health worker or a citizen, in what is required from you. Indonesian technology uptake is incredibly high globally. So that could be a factor as well. Also, hierarchies or cultures of hierarchies. Yeah, harus diharuskan, baru mau. Yeah, so there's this sort of culture of, if it's not mandated, then I'm just not going to do it. So, if someone from up there is telling me to do it, I'll do it. So there's, perhaps cultures of hierarchy in play as well. But is there anything that you'd like to add around cultures of, this is a big culture shift. And on one hand, we do have very high rates of uptake and engagement with technology in Indonesian society, much more in some sectors than the average probably Australian citizen of trying to navigate our MyGov app and all of these things we have that don't really work. Indonesia is amazing. I can do everything online that I cannot do in my everyday life in Australia. So, and, you know, on one side we have an incredible engagement with technology and uptake and adaptability. And on the other hand, you know, I think there's also some things just don't work. I don't know if you would like to add anything from the education perspective.
Not necessarily from an educational perspective, but like what I experienced like when working with the government and as well as education sector, health sector, because I was part of the UN system back in the day. And then when it comes to Indonesia, I think the hardest part is like the shifts of the government. They require the people to do sort and so like it can be like when it comes to sustainability, like many of these apps like would last maybe a year and two, like people are so used to it, and then next year, okay, there's a new app, like what are you going to do about it? So people have that mentality over the years that what is the most helpful at the end? Like there's nothing works. Anyways, like it's to be obedient to some rules, but at the end it doesn't work for them. So again, comes to your conclusion, people get tired of it. So I think again, like I shared in the beginning of my presentation, that the sustainability of a program or partnership, it has to be the key, and then the conversation or discussion around the shared goals has to be in the heart of like every partnership, because at the end, governments or administration changes over time, but like if we have the shared goal in the beginning, it stays, and then if we have a meaningful participation from stakeholders, at the end it stays, and then people will continue no matter the shifts of the government, like it still stays. So I think when it comes to technology, especially in health, like I have in my phone, I have like 5 different apps, and I don't use any of them because I thought like one is like, oh, this is good, and then like it changes the next month, and like no, I'm not gonna keep up with that. So
I'll add one last thing. I'm not sure how relevant it is in the health app world. Jadi I'll share my experience. But from a private sector, there's really only 2 reasons why you actually use technology. One is if it improves your quality or product in some way. And the second one is if it helps you to cut cost. Gitu. Jadi why do educators or schools not do, why has online digital tutoring not worked in Indonesia? Simple. It's cheaper to hire a tutor, and they're better, you know, it's still more personalized than a digital tutor. So at this point, it's never going to take off. Gitu. And I think, why do we invest in some big systems, misalnya kayak financial ERP system, even though it's more complicated? Well, it's not cheaper, but it'll improve your outcome because, you know, you can manage revenues better, misalnya. You can manage your financials better because the data becomes transparent. And so you have to force everyone to get the data clean, get it right, get it in the system, because it makes sense from that perspective. So I would say maybe get back on the drawing board and, you know, really look at the value proposition that does. Is the automation of the Posyandu really, you know, can you justify it to the users in terms of how much it helps them, or some kind of output about data, cleanliness, analytics that helps? You know, maybe that's an area to get buy-in. Or, you know, any other value proposition that you have probably needs to be more communicated. Yeah.
I think we all have, it's impossible for us not to have a view on technology because we just live through it. Probably I'm the oldest in this group, I suspect, and I started working with paper. Has anyone heard of paper? You know, and it just keeps on going. And now I do a lot of work in our institute. So I'm with the Institute for Sustainable Futures around AI technologies and the energy and water implications, and they're huge. But the technology side is, what I see is, this is really the private sector conversation here, is we know that the trend has always been new, you know, over generation, over basically decades, there's been constant changes. The technology sector are not actually always very good at working out what we need. And there's things, for instance, text messages, they didn't pick it, right? So just because the technology sector's put something out and said, here it is, doesn't actually mean that it links to the demand. And the other thing I think there's a lot of danger here is what we call lock-in, right? So a technology provider offers something and then the price goes up when you're locked into it. Yeah, exactly that. So I think sometimes as a user of technology, waiting for the technology to mature is not a bad idea, because you'll actually work out, we know that there'll be a transition. We know we'll be using more of this over time, but not everything that will be used, like the apps that you're talking about, will actually be used. And then I come back to there's not just a business cost, but there's a sustainability cost of this technology too, and we're not looking at that. Now, it's absolutely massive. Ireland, 20% of the energy grid is from data centres. 5 cities in the US, 10% of their grid, and even in Sydney, here right now, 5% of our energy is from data centres. So huge energy implications as well.
No, but because like those online, there are many joining.
Okay. I don't know, if it is relevant to this idea. For technological application, it needs much more trial and error to get to the desired outcome. Often it cannot get the desired outcome. Sometimes on the process, you will let's see this path. If we get these results, let's see the another path. If we get this result, people often want the outcome first, not to go to the process. There's the one thing like herding mentality. Often in a room, if you see a fire in front of a crowd, people often wait for someone to step forward. Then they go I can go and I can see the outcome, not the process.
Maybe someone from audience online.
I think we have about, let's say, 5 more minutes.
Okay.
So why don't we, so one more question here, and then we might do
Wrap up.
Okay, hi, I'm Jaslyn. I'm taking Master of Sustainability now in University of Sydney. I also have my bachelor's degree in accounting from Universitas Pelita Harapan in Indonesia. Yes. Okay, so I'm going from accounting and switching to STEM degree here in Sydney, taking sustainability. So I'm very intrigued with your opinion. Just now you mentioned that students in Indonesia, they have the fear of taking risks, like venturing to the STEM field or to the AI, because they have the fear that it might not work or they might not be able to find a job. And I just want to ask for a feedback, because I felt that the underlying factors or the reason behind those fears is that not taking the risk is that they have the fear, what if they come back to Indonesia and they're not able to find a job? Because it's like a chicken and egg situations. So students go to overseas to have that education and then returning back to Indonesia to contribute, or they have to see that someone has made it, like this field works and okay, I will study and going back to contribute in Indonesia. So just asking for your perspective, if you can give advice for students, young students, maybe like me as example, who venturing into new fields and trying to see how we can improve those fields in Indonesia, what advice would you give? Because I'm kind of also in a very confusing situations. I feel that in Australia, there's a lot of opportunities, especially related to work. There's a lot of startups coming up regarding to finance and sustainability and climate change. They kind of have this a very supporting field for new graduates to start their careers on. But back in Indonesia, I felt that it might not be as much opportunities available compared to here in Sydney. So what's your thoughts about it?
Well, first of all, it's so wonderful to have one of our alumni here. That makes us so proud. Thank you for coming to this session and meeting up with us as well. So I think from a purely subjective perspective, this is what I've seen. We send nurses from our university to the Netherlands and to the US and other countries, and they all say, in comparison with the Filipinos, the Indonesians are most likely to go home. And they like that because there's a huge migration problem in the Netherlands and all. So they like that. But Indonesians are, I think generally they're more risk averse and they like to be at home and with community in comparison to other countries from an anecdotal personal perspective. But I think having said that, I think, the global landscape is really should really be your oyster, even though it might not be a permanent outlook. I think there's nothing wrong with working overseas or getting, getting a job overseas or getting exposure overseas, because that also, in many senses, benefits Indonesia. But I would say also that if you were to look at Indonesia, the beauty of our country is that there's a lot of opportunities to be a trailblazer. And I think, part of my learning for ourselves is also that, we don't have the brightest ideas. Most of our ideas, if not all, basically come from looking at developed countries. And we take that and we adapt it to the Indonesian context. So I would say that in the area of sustainability, engineering, and all that, actually the potential is huge. And the reason that I have dabbled into that is also because we've done AI. The next one that we wanted to do is a sustainability engineering. So we want to transform all of our programs into that direction. And when you see that it's a really huge budding industry. And so I would say, don't cross Indonesia off the list as well. I think look at opportunities where you can be the only one and that you can be number one. And I think that will give you an edge over the others. Yeah.
And just so our institute is obviously sustainability, and the work that we do is sustainable finance. So from a personal perspective, I think you are right in the hot area at the moment, right? So accounting standards linked to sustainability. So the International Sustainability Standards Board, all the things that you'd be looking at. But when you also look at, so Australia, there's conversations around this, but we're not mature either. We haven't got there yet. But what we know this with our accounting courses, what you'll expect in the future is that anyone who does an accounting degree will need to be able to understand how sustainability sits there, because this is not, the international standards around this are rolling through everywhere. Now, in Indonesia, because we ran an Australia Awards program on sustainable finance just last year, if you're looking at the four stock exchanges that are the leaders in our region, it's Australia, Sydney, Singapore, Indonesia, Jakarta, and Malaysia. So Indonesia's got the frameworks right, probably not yet getting the demand, but the demand's going to come, right? So I think you're right in the right spot.
It's definitely an industry of the future, and I think you always want to preempt what's coming. I definitely believe it's an industry of the future, and so we want to preempt our educational programs to go in that direction as well.
Maybe to wrap up, our one point, our one takeaway, I have so many, but really it's about, genuine partnerships, how we can assist, how we can play our roles wherever we sit in this ecosystem, to join those dots, to make sure that we're aligned on, what national government's trying to do, what private sector can do, and keep that equity and that innovation and sustainability at the core of what we're trying to achieve. I think that's my 2 cents.
No, I'm like, that's good. Yeah, I think my last takeaway from like the conversation and then for the past few days, really at the end we're good at whatever we're doing in our respective sectors. Like the communication is really the key, and then sustainability has to be like the main core of all of this, and then partnership, as long the trust, as long the agility of our of the program can be, we have to be agile on that, but at the same time, as long as we have a shared goal, that's where we go. That's all.
I agree. Well, I think at the end of the day, partnerships are essential. You know, we work as an ecosystem, whether we like it or not, with or without the STEM Indonesia Cerdas movement. We'll still be dealing with the government and, you know, different, you know, organizations in society. So I think collaboration is the way forward.
And my role here is just to say thank you for inviting me to participate in the conversations, and also asking everyone to thank our three speakers as well. Thanks all.